What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. I know the layout's a little different today. I'm just trying something new. One of the things I've been wanting to do is make sure that I'm being as interactive as possible with you guys in terms of, the draft content, off-season content, giving you guys my thoughts, opinions, talking about stuff that y'all want to hear me talk about. So I did something a little different. Posted a tweet on Twitter, just for people to throw me Steelers NFL draft related questions. And then I was going to answer as many as I could for a potential YouTube video. Now, the caveat to that is you guys are awesome. I really appreciate the support, but y'all gave me 66 questions. That was quite a bit and definitely more than I was anticipating getting. So I'm going to try to answer as many as I can. I don't really know how long I'm going to make the YouTube video. It might be 10 minutes. It might be 30. I don't know. We'll just see kind of how this thing goes. I'm sure some questions I'll have more to go into. I've already kind of browsed through a lot of them, and some of the questions are, relatively similar, asking some of the same stuff in different ways. So like we'll be able to knock out some of them just kind of with the same answer. But anyways, appreciate you guys' input, support on Twitter, on the channel, all that stuff. Just some housekeeping type of stuff. The Steelers did just hire offensive coordinator Arthur Smith, former Falcons head coach, Tennessee Titans assistant, offensive line tight ends for a while, and then he was the offensive coordinator for 2 seasons there prior to getting his first head coach job. So we heard from Art Rooney yesterday talk about, this was Mike Tomlin's hire. He didn't want to step in the way. He was going to, have his normal input, but this is who Mike Tomlin wanted. This is the direction that they're going on offense. There's probably some questions in here about offensive coordinator stuff, so I will refer back to those. I talked about the offensive coordinator search yesterday on the channel. The first part of that video, if you go to yesterday's video, is talking about Arthur Smith and his offense. It's like 8 minutes long or something like that. So if you want to know my thoughts, go to that. And then there's also a thread on Twitter discussing a lot of the same things in terms of like positive, negatives to the hire, all that stuff. So if you guys are interested in that, we're not going to talk about that too much in this particular video, but just some housekeeping stuff. Wanted y'all to get informed in that direction. Also, like a Senior Bowl watch list of just NFL prospects to watch at the Senior Bowl. Practice kicked off today. So if you guys are interested in that, check out SteelersNow.com. Before we get into it, let's just go through some questions here. I'm not going to go in any specific order. I'll kind of bounce around. There will be some stuff that I skip over, and that's not just necessarily like a personal thing, guys. It's more about me. Just maybe I don't have the answer to the prospect or question that you have. Try to keep things relevant as possible. I got Chop. This is a guy who is a big time supporter of the channel, and I really appreciate it. Top 5 needs going into the draft. I think that's a loaded question. I mean, you could probably ask 10 different content creators, media guys, you'll get different answers. I've already talked about the need to add to the quarterback room, so we'll kind of save that for a different conversation because there's a lot of quarterback questions in here. First and foremost for me, speed in the back end. That's been something that I harped on a lot in the channel. Just adding to the cornerback room. I think Joey Porter Jr. had a fantastic rookie season. Would love to get another corner opposite him for the future. And this is a really good cornerback class. We'll talk a lot about several different prospects that I like, but there's going to be multiple good cornerback options where they're picking at pick 20, and that's even if they don't move up. Cornerback's one of the deepest positions in the draft, so sitting pretty there. Same with offensive tackle. I mean, you listen to a lot of the DraftNet guys that do this year round, even more in depth than myself. You'll know like there's potential for 6, 7, 8 guys maybe going the first round this year, and that's even there's always guys that get pushed up into the first round without first round grades. Like it wouldn't surprise me if I finished with at least like 5 first round offensive tackle prospects this year. Just combing through some of the tape on those guys throughout the year. This is an excellent class. So very offensive heavy. The other really strong position is receiver, which we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But, I think speed in the back end, adding a tackle is important. I don't think that you can roll into next season with Dan Moore Jr. slated as a starter. Chuks Okorafor is going to get moved, probably traded for a late round pick, or maybe just flat out released for cap space. They got to add a tackle and decide what they're going to do with Broderick Jones if he's going to play left or right. Inside linebacker is a position that, probably need to think about. You can make the argument for safety. The Steelers don't have a ton of free agents, but a lot of their free agents are kind of those low tier free agents or like baseline starters, guys that they have some decisions to make on. So, we'll have a better idea of quote unquote draft needs after free agency. But I think you could see depth or positional players all across the defense in order to get a little bit younger on that side of the ball. I mean, they were 32nd in average age, snap adjusted age on defense this past year. Sorry, it took me a second to get that out there. Um, and then just on offense, I think you got a lot of the same pieces coming back. Like I said, tackle, center is a big position that I want them to upgrade on. I have a lot of thoughts on the center class in general. So we'll talk a little bit about some centers in particular. But I think those positions are kind of the heavy hitters that I would want to look at. Let's talk about which position needs addressed with a higher priority, center or inside linebacker. I'm going to say center just because I thought Mason Cole, like some of his limitations really showed up this year in terms of, holding back some of the stuff they want to do on offense. Now that we know Arthur Smith is going to be the offensive coordinator, you have to get at athletic center. Like his system being all that zone heavy, outside zone, wide zone, uh, principles, you have to have an athletic center who excels in space. And that's just not something Mason Cole is very good at. So I fully anticipate if it wasn't already extremely high on the priority list, it needs to be even higher. And I think a guy like Oregon's Dexter Powers Johnson is absolutely at the top of that list. I know a lot of Steelers fans have been talking to me about him, being the second round pick. I think they might just have to take him at 20. I know he's already had some really good reps at the Senior Bowl today, but I was actually watching his film. I watched a little bit a couple months ago when my good buddy Nick Martin was talking about him on Twitter. I was really impressed, but I watched his film 2 days ago. I watched like 3 games. He's fantastic. I mean, just the way that he moves at 330 plus pounds. He weighed in at 334 at the Senior Bowl today. But the way he moves in space, I mean, he has a wrestling background, physical is all get out. He's an excellent player, man. If they picked him at 20, knowing the need, knowing the system now that they're going to be operating in on offense, 2 thumbs up. Like I have no qualms of taking him at 20. People will talk about positional value and all that different stuff. To me, draft good players, positional value comes second to that. I think Jackson Powers Johnson's a really good player. So let's see. Looking at Steelers needs, depth of positions in the draft. What are the holes? We have the easiest fill in the draft. Or which do we need to prioritize heading into free agency? I mean, it's always kind of I don't really know how to answer that per se. I think your question probably is what a lot of people have been asking about. Like, do the Steelers need to add a veteran corner, like a guy like Jalen Johnson or L'Jarius Sneed, paying up for that top echelon corner to pair with Joey Porter Jr., or should they go the draft route? Like I said, this is a really good cornerback class. I don't know that the Steelers are going to be players for guys like Johnson or Sneed, just because I think both of those are going to get huge paydays, and that's not really normally the Steelers' style to go out and pay big for that. What the Steelers typically do, and I mean, you guys, if y'all watch the channel, y'all know the Steelers typically attack free agency. They go after like their quote unquote needs. They try to get guys that fit the culture, fit the system, and then they'll sometimes even draft the same position early in the draft. That's kind of like a succession plan type of thing. So that's typically how those things work out. So I don't know if they'll be big players, and I think that could be potentially where you're going with that. But that's kind of my answer there. J Dub, what do you think they do defensive line this offseason? Which DTs interest you in the draft? I haven't gotten around to watching a ton of defensive tackles. I know like Newton's a really good player. The dude from Texas, I think actually they've got 2 guys that are really interesting. I haven't scouted very many defensive tackles like in terms of like actual tape, just from what I've seen live. I know the defensive line stuff, I wrote about this a couple weeks ago. It's really interesting, man, because they've got a lot of decisions to make. Cam Hayward, played this season hurt, obviously. He definitely looked like he lost a little bit of a step in terms of like some of the pass rushing juice, some of the explosiveness. How much of that is injury? How much of that is, him getting up there in age? And like, obviously he has a over $20 million cap hit for next season. I personally believe that Hayward's going to be back. I think he can still be a really solid player. Even if, he's definitely on the last like year or two of him being like a really plus player on defense. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. Cam's had a fantastic career. Would love to get him a Super Bowl. I just, Father Time waits for nobody. Having that succession plan is really important. I think what they did with Keanu Benton was fantastic last year in terms of getting him where they got him. I think Benton's a stud. You probably heard me talk about him on the channel a lot. I've written about him, tweeted about him. I love Keanu Benton. I actually think he would be an even better player if they would let him play more 3 technique. play more in sub personnel, which hopefully we see that next season. But Mike Tomlin mentioned something really interesting to me. He used the word dominant in his postseason, like first presser or whatever, that they think that they can get him to a dominant level sooner rather than later. Tomlin doesn't throw that word around very often, man. So the fact that he was willing to do that, I think he's really high on Benton as well. So going to be interesting to see. Ogunjobi's the wild card, man. Like I said a couple years ago or last year when they signed him to that contract, my first initial reaction was like just blown away because I could not believe that they signed him for like 3 years. I think it was like 3 years, like 28 million or something like that, which isn't like astronomical. It's not something that's going to cripple your franchise. It was just that he was really inconsistent and not really healthy the first year he was here, and then they signed him to a 3 year extension. Basically, I just didn't see that coming. And then he didn't. He was really quiet all season long. I mean, even though he was a little bit more healthy this past year, I think Ogunjobi kind of just is what he is. I mean, he's a guy in his late 20s now. He's a guy that just runs really hot and cold. He's what I would call, I think that there's a good lesson there. I think sometimes teams pay second contracts out and give raises out to solid or above average players, and they pay them a little bit too much money, and those are kind of the guys that those are the contracts I typically don't like to give out. I have no problem with giving guys second contracts, or like, if you got an elite talent, you pay that elite talent, the TJ Watts, the Mika Fitzpatricks, guys like that. I think you run into trouble though when you're paying like solid players or average players to big money deals like that. It's just my opinion. But I think they probably had that in mind, that he was going to play better this year once he got healthy, and then with Cam Hayward's age in mind, what's going to happen with that? Who's going to be the succession plan? And I think that maybe they regret that. I don't really know. Hopefully, Ogunjobi's going to be back because they don't really have stand a lot to gain on the cap by cutting him, and also like some of their developmental pieces like Armon Watts, a free agent. I think Montravius Adams maybe a free agent, or maybe he's back. I'm not sure. DeMarvin Leal, that pick hasn't really turned out. He was inactive for a good chunk of the second half of the season. So to answer your question, haven't watched the TTs. Defensive line, you could probably make the argument that they should definitely invest there, whether that be a small veteran free agent signing or for depth, or maybe take like a mid-round guy on the defensive line. But they've got a lot invested in there. Benton, second-round pick, Ogunjobi and Hayward are going to cost them over $30 million on the cap next year. It's hard to really warrant putting that at the very top of the priority list with everything else. So, let's see. I think Wes had a really good question. I want to answer that. Do you think either Drake May or Jane Daniels is worth trading up for if they start to fall some, or do you value the first and second we have this year more for other positions of need? Drake May, absolutely, but I fully expect Drake May to be a top 2-3 pick, and I think Jane Daniels could be in that realm as well. I have scouted both guys. I've watched May more live than I've watched Daniels this past season, just because I was paying a little more attention to May. Some things about May, I think that a lot of the things that he does well are just exceptional. Like, I think that he is for one, I think he's tough as nails. That's something I always look at with quarterbacks. He has creation capacity. He can throw the ball down the field, relatively accurate, although I would like to see him be like more precise. I think that there are some times where some of his ball location precision is a little bit inconsistent, but I think as a processor, some of the things that he's willing to do, the windows he's willing to test, just in terms of like mechanics, like tying his feet to his eyes, all that stuff. Just a really good arm, man. Like arm talent, very, very good player. Jaden Daniels is a really interesting player because, we've known about Daniels for a long time. He was at Arizona State for forever. And, he was a guy who looked really good early and then kind of fell off the map, had that kind of well-documented fallout with Arizona State, goes to LSU, and then he just really turned up this past year, man. Really the big difference between this year and years past was Daniels was surgical throwing the ball down the field. I mean, like, historically great in terms of throwing the deep ball this year. I think of all those slot fades he hit to like Malik Neighbors and throwing the go balls and stuff to Brian Thomas. Obviously, having two very, very good to great collegiate weapons and Neighbors and Thomas definitely helps. But I think that Daniels just showed consistent improvement. You look at like the dual threat ability with Daniels too, like excellent straight line speed, has creation capacity. I think that Daniels' arm is above average-ish. But I do think that, like, if you're talking about a guy that would you take him at 20? Like, I think that there is significant upside with Daniels. The one thing, couple things I worry about with him is I think his process is really inconsistent. He's also like barely over 200 pounds, and that just scares the living daylights out of me. He takes some absolute kill shots. He does not protect his body well enough, and I just think that's concerning. But it's not everything. We saw Anthony Richardson; he's built like a tank, and he got hurt a bunch last year running around, and that's always the concern when you got those dual threat quarterbacks that don't know how to protect themselves yet, and that's just something you have to deal with. But to answer your question, would I trade up for either one of them? May, absolutely. I think Daniels is a little more complicated than that, depending on like the system that you're trying to run. Um, but Daniels to me is the third best quarterback in terms of just like tape and looking at potential upside and all that. He's the third best quarterback that I've seen so far, and I've watched most of the top guys. So I know there's a lot of quarterback questions in here, so I'm sure I'll talk more about that. Um, West Coast guy, just talked about Newton a little bit. I haven't watched him like specifically just because I'm not really sure he's a Steelers ish guy, but a really talented player, excellent pass rusher, a lot of juice. Derek, what in your opinion would be the pick at 20 if it was pure best player available by choice? Kind of hard to say because I don't really know the board. I don't know what we're talking about there. But like I said, cornerback, tackle, I think you really can't go wrong. There's going to be good players available at both positions. Some of my favorite guys that I've seen like kind of mocked to the Steelers, even though I'm a little skeptical that they're going to be there. Alabama's Terrion Arnold is a fantastic player, unbelievable mover for his size. Can play in the boundary, can play in the slot, ball skills, really aggressive, click and close ability, trigger, all that stuff. Really, really impressive mover. But to me, he's like this draft class is really littered with offensive players. So like I think you're gonna see like in the top 10, it wouldn't surprise me if we saw 8, 9 guys on offense go in the top 10. It's just an offensive heavy draft, especially at the top. So some of those corners could fall, but I could also see in like somebody in the top 10. If you do want to take a defensive player, I think that Terrion Arnold could very well be the top defender taken in the class. I think he's that good of a player. Dallas Turner, probably the other guy that I think would be potentially the first guy off the board on defense, but also from Alabama. But shocker there, right? But Terrion Arnold's one of my favorite picks at 20. There's a lot of guys that I think I would be happy with at that juncture. But Terrion Arnold, and I wouldn't hate McKinstry either in the first round. But Arnold's just a guy who, of all the guys that I've scouted so far and watched like the all 22 on, he's one of my favorites without a doubt. What do you think they target free agency? What positions do you think they target round 1 and 2? Kind of answered both of those a little bit already. Do you think hiring a McVay school offensive coordinator will help improve KP8 enough to make the Steelers viably competitive next season? I think that here's the thing, and I've said this a lot on Twitter. I think that there's a narrative that in some way is true, right, about the Shanahan McVay system, that it's very quarterback friendly. And like, I don't think that anyone would necessarily deny that. But I also think that when you hear people talk about like Shanahan style quarterbacks, I think that sometimes we lose focus on what that really means, like what the type of quarterback that typically succeeds in those type of environments looks like. You have to be willing to throw over the middle of the field. You have to throw with anticipation. And I think that those are things that we've seen Kenny struggle with. Now, can those be unlocked? Can those be improved upon? Yeah, absolutely. But it's not just as simple as like, oh, just throw him in this specific system. He's gonna flourish. I mean, there has to be significant development, I think, in those areas. I mean, I've highlighted it on Twitter. The Steelers don't attack the middle of the field very well from a schematic standpoint. I think that's a big reason why they've looked so stale on offense over the past really decade. But I've highlighted plays where like they're Shanahan staples, like drift swirl, the bow concept, stuff like that. I mean, they don't run them as often or nearly as well as like the Niners or even the Rams or the Packers run. But I've seen Kenny run those plays, and like he hasn't looked very comfortable running those style of plays. So it's kind of difficult for me to just say that that's like a catch all. But I understand the optimism. I think generally speaking, that seeing him in that type of environment would have at least been you know, a good thing to know where he was at and if it was going to be something just to give us confirmation, I guess, on the bias aspect of it. But Arthur Smith's offense is going to require him to be under center a lot more. The Falcons were near the bottom of the league and shotgun and stuff, it's going to be a significant change from like what he's been used to. And I'm hopeful. Smith, one thing that he does, I don't necessarily want to say that he's an expert at developing quarterbacks, but I think he does put guardrails up on the offense in order to kind of keep them into between the lines. I think that's probably something that Pickett needs at this stage of his development. So we'll see. I mean, it's going to be very different for sure. But um, I'm not overly optimistic, but I hope that hopefully it works out. Um, Atrocious penguin. Any worthy inside backers in the draft? Yeah, wrote about Cedric Gray, North Carolina. A guy that I think has 3 down potential at the next level. He's a guy that I kind of like. Wrote about Edgerrin Cooper for Texas A&M. He's a guy that's really interesting, explosive guy, could really run, play in space. They asked him to do some really really fun stuff on defense this past season. Like I noticed, I watched the games against Alabama and LSU, and like they would have him spy Jalen Milroe and Jaden Daniels. So like really good athletes at the quarterback position. They would basically either bring him as a blitzer to kind of clog up those escape lanes for the quarterback, or they would have him kind of act like he was blitzing and then spy, and he was running those guys down in space. So really, really nice player. Good length too. Peyton Wilson from NC State is a guy that I have not watched. I haven't studied him, but I've watched him live a couple times, and he's been a guy that's been around for a good amount of time. He just has a very lengthy injury history. Like I think he could make himself some money in Mobile, but he's a guy who I have no idea what type of like. I'm sure I will like watch him and study him before the combine next month. I have no idea what to do with him though, because like when guys have that amount of injury history, I want to say he's had like 6 season-ending injuries dating back to high school. Don't quote me on the exact number, but like it's been lengthy. So like I don't know what kind of grade or really the thoughts to put on that. But Wilson, I think, does have like 3 down potential. Like in terms of like just the most talented off ball linebacker in the class, he's up there. Who are your top 10 corners in this draft? Man, that's a really difficult one to answer in a forum like this, just because that's a lengthy question. I also think corners is like I do try to put like a numeric value on when I'm trying to build like a big board. Like last year I did a top 100. I'm not sure if I'll get to that many guys this year, just with everything else I got going on. But I try to put like a number value so I can rank guys. But like corner and like receiver and really every position is just so scheme oriented too. Like corners and receivers more like a flavor thing for me. Like even ranking them is difficult. Putting them in tiers is probably more applicable. And ranking them by like skill set or what you're wanting. For this class specifically, like I mentioned, Arnold, I really like him because I think he's got inside outside versatility. But there's certain guys that I really like that can only play on the boundary. Like I would only want to pick like a guy like Kool-Aid McKinstry if I could play him on the boundary. And even some other guys that like only play in the slot. Like I actually prefer. I think I've been going back and forth about what to do with Cooper DeJean from Iowa. Really like him as a football player, just not really sure where he's going to play. I think depending on the system, like if you were playing like cover 3 heavy and asking him to play a bunch of bail technique, I think he can survive on the outside. Now, if you're asking him to go play in a system where that's going to require him playing a lot of man coverage, I think I'd rather have him in the slot, or I think I'd rather have him at safety. Like I think there's so much context that's necessary there. But Terry Arnold's the best corner that I've watched so far. I haven't watched everybody. I've watched Kool-Aid. I've watched DeJean. I've watched Wiggins. I've watched Kalen King. I've watched every bit of Quinyon Mitchell that I can possibly find, but I only have 2 games of all 22 for him, so it's impossible for me to like put like an actual grade. That kid, Quinyon Mitchell, y'all may not be familiar with him, but from Toledo, long, legit, like 4.3 speed, excellent click and close ability. The burst is unbelievable. Ball skills, super super productive. Senior Bowl is going to be interesting for him just to get a jump look at him with that jump in competition, see how he does. But yeah, I'm not to the point where I'm going to put out like a rankings list just yet. So what are the odds you see? Offensive tackle at center in the first 2 rounds. I personally love Fuega and Frazier. I mean, I think it's definitely possible. I think them investing and trading up for a tackle last year and Broderick Jones is that's a significant investment if you're talking about putting 3 first 2 round picks on the offensive line in that short of a time frame. I'm not sure we see that or see it play out like that, but I do think a tackle or a center is going to be one of their first couple picks for sure. I definitely, and I definitely agree with the line of thinking too. Like I said earlier, I think tackle and center are both, big needs. Sorry, I'm gonna take a drink now. Um, Man, we have a lot of questions left, don't we? Good God. Okay, so try to get through as many of these as possible. Kind of goes with the draft and free agency. Where you think nickel position ranks among needs, and is there potential one coming out of college? That's a really good question. You know, nickel to me, and you guys that follow me on Twitter have heard me rant about this before. The nickel position is one of the most undervalued positions in the NFL right now. Like, I really believe it's oftentimes cast aside as like it used to be this thing, right? Like we had small corners and you just threw them in the nickel spot and said, like, all right, you're gonna go match up with those small slot receivers, and that's it. The NFL is different now, man. Like those guys in the slot, they got to deal with tight ends getting flexed out. They got to deal with like the flexed tight ends. So like you're like Evan Ingrams of the world, you're Noah Fant, like those guys that are like glorified receivers, but they're 6'5", 240 something. And then you got your power slots. So like your guys like Juan Jennings, your CD Lambs, your bigger bodied receivers that teams move in the slot to get that matchup advantage, because it used to be like, hey, everybody who's a nickel is this small player. And then you got to deal with the 5'9" shifty guys that you put out there that are these route runners with really quick feet and, have all these two-way goes and stuff like that. It's a difficult position. That's why I think like you look at like the Ravens defense and like what Kyle Hamilton's brought to Mike McDonald's scheme and some of the things that he allows them to do in coverage is one thing. But then like, you got guys like Hamilton that can blitz. And then you also have to factor in that, there are times when you're the nickel player that you're in the run fit. You're close to a line of scrimmage. You have to be willing to actually play the run. So it's just there's so much that goes into it. But to answer your question, I do think it's a need. What happens next year with Patrick Peterson is really up in the air for me. I don't know what you do with him because I don't think he's a good enough tackler to play safety. I know he kept a lid on things for the most part in the back end when he was asked to play there. He cannot play boundary corner anymore at a high enough level, in my opinion, to go into the season with him as a starter. Also has a 10 million plus cap hit. I don't know what they're going to do with him. Maybe he's the nickel next year. Maybe he's a chess piece. I don't really know. But in terms of guys that I like, nickels coming out, Mikey Sanders still from Michigan is an excellent player. He's got some. It's become so cliche in the Steelers world to call everybody like all these like slot, smallish, feisty guys. Mike Hilton, but he has some Mike Hilton kind of vibes. I think he's a little bit better of a coverage player coming out for sure. But really like him. He's got some goods. I think the Steelers fan base would absolutely love him too. Another guy that I really like, he played safety, a lot more safety this year. I feel like the nickel, Javon Bullard from Georgia. That dude's a pit bull, like a pit bull. Like you want somebody that's gonna like knock your block off, physical, really competitive. He's a little bit on the undersized radar, but that dude brings it every play. And I really think he's a good player too. Like I said, safety versatility is kind of cool too. If you're looking for a guy who could maybe in base he plays safety, and maybe when you go nickel you kind of use like a big nickel thing and you put him in the slot and then bring in a third safety. I don't know, but Bullard's a guy that probably goes day two. That I liked a lot in the summer scouting. I haven't watched his 2023 tape as much, but who's your number one D-line guy in the draft? I talked about that a little bit earlier, so I'm not gonna do that. You think they sign a free agent quarterback or try to draft one early? Kind of talked a little about that as well, Donnie. Listen, I do think that they will sign a corner and draft one. I do think so. It just what type of investment is that? I don't foresee them going out and getting like a Jalen Johnson, L'Jarius Sneed, that type of player. I just it would go against everything they've ever done in free agency. Now, could I see them signing a mid-tier free agent corner as like a starter, and then maybe them going back to the well in the middle rounds, like third, fourth round, taking another developmental corner? I could absolutely see them doing that, because you got to think like outside of Joey Porter Jr. and however you're going to classify Patrick Peterson at this stage of his career, everybody else is a free agent. So like Levi Wallace, free agent. Chandon Sullivan was on a 1-year deal, free agent. James Pierre, free agent. A lot of people, I think there is a question in here somewhere about Corey Trice. Well, I don't know where that's at. It's somewhere in here. But Corey Trice, a guy that I don't think you can really necessarily count on. Kind of goes back to the injury thing that I said earlier with a guy like Peyton Wilson. Trice is a guy. I mean, you guys that follow the channel, some of y'all are probably here because you subscribe to the Corey. You subscribe to the channel after the Corey Trice video. I think it's my most watched video ever on the channel. It's either that or second. But I like Trice a lot. A lot of tools, upside. I thought his tape at Purdue was fantastic. But when you're a guy who's had that many knee injuries, multiple ACL injuries, season enders, it's difficult. Like he's a lottery ticket in my eyes. And I'm glad they've got him, especially because you just invested a 7th-round pick on him. You didn't spend anything to get him. I'm glad they got him, and I hope he bounces back. And I would love to see it work out for him. But you can't necessarily count on that type of player when he's had that much trouble staying on the field. And it's not his fault. It's just, kids have been really cursed, honestly, with some really bad luck. So, let's see. P. Wolf, with the championship week games having just ended, it was interesting to see the tight ends were still playing. You can make an argument that they were the best 4 tight ends in the league. That's a really good question. I think that's been pointed out on several different levels. All the different tight ends that have made a significant impact. If you guys follow me on Twitter, I saw I was a huge Sam Laporta fan, and I honestly wasn't even high enough on him. I think Laporta's fantastic. But I think you're just seeing, the way that offenses are trying to attack defenses these days. You're seeing a lot of these teams, get more heavy personnel on the field. Heavy personnel. Some of the advantages with that, it's not just to run the ball. If you have multiple good receiving tight end options, you can get those guys matched up on linebackers, which is the second part of your question. But also, like when you get in those 12, 13 personnel looks, what happens is a lot of defenses get really static versus those. So what they'll do is they'll roll a safety down, then they'll play a lot of cover 3. Well, if you know about like Mike Leach, and you heard some of the phrases about cover 3, everything beats cover 3. Cover 3 is the easiest coverage in the world to beat, despite it being like, probably the most used coverage in the NFL. Like offensive coordinators, good ones at least, they love cover 3. So, there are advantages to stuff like that. But yeah, I definitely think that's a good observation. A lot of teams using multiple tight ends, and the Steelers, invested in that. They got Darnell Washington. I'm interested to see, Arthur Smith's offense prioritizes 12, 13 personnel. I'm interested to see what he can unlock there. But in terms of what Pittsburgh needs to do to cover the position, I mean, it goes back to the inside linebacker discussion. I mean, this inside linebacker class is not very good, in my opinion, but it's just hard to find guys at that position. I think the NFL, the way the NFL evaluates the off-ball linebacker position is probably their worst position. Like if you just look at like draft success, think about the guys that have been drafted in the first round in the last 5-10 years. There's just not very many hit rates. Like the hit rate's been atrocious. Devin Bush, Devin White's been, very polarizing in the Tampa Bay world. I know Patrick Queen put it together the last year and a half since they acquired Roquan Smith. But guys that have been taken early, it just hasn't worked out. And it's a position I think that takes a little bit longer. Even the guys that have translated, like I think about Jordan Brooks or Seattle, it takes those guys to like year 3 or year 4 to be good players. And I know that's a long time for, a fan bases, especially because everybody's impatient to wait on getting good play. But linebackers kind of tough. It goes back to what I was saying about like the nickel spot. I mean, you're asking these guys, especially now with the heavy personnel and stuff, like a lot of these offenses know that teams have relegated to putting these smaller bodies in the box. So at defensive line, at inside linebacker, you want to put these, like, look at what Dallas did last year. I love Marquise Bell coming out of college. I thought he was a really good player that was being undervalued. He's not a starting inside linebacker in the league, though. Like, he's out there playing at 205. And what happened to Dallas? Green Bay was like, you want to put 220-pound linebackers on the field? We're just going to run this down your throat and see if your 220-pounders or Marquise Bell, in his case, 205 pounds, can get off blocks at the second level. It's difficult because you're asking those smaller guys to, hey, I've got to go, I got to be able to beat blocks at the point of attack and disengage, but I've also got to be good enough in coverage to where I have good spatial awareness against zone, and then I've got to potentially man up a guy like Travis Kelce. It's difficult. Like, it's one of the most difficult positions to play. And quite frankly, we just don't have very many good off-ball linebackers in the league right now. Like, it's probably the position, I would say, other than maybe offensive line, because offensive line is always one of the most thin positions in the NFL, that we just don't have enough talent. So it's not just a Steelers thing. To answer your question, it's a league-wide thing. Everyone is trying to find linebackers. So if there is somebody that you're really confident in, I think you could make an argument, even though it's not seen as a quote-unquote premier position, those guys are still pretty valuable just because there's just not very many good ones, to be honest with you. All right, just a couple more here, man. I almost, oh my gosh, never mind. I am not anywhere close to being done. Holy crap! All right, man. What time are we on here? 35 minutes. All right, I'm gonna keep going just because my voice is not completely out, but I want to try to keep some of these answers, I guess, a little bit shorter. How high should the Steelers draft quarterback? What are the chances the team addresses safety? I'll go with the first question. How high should the Steelers draft the quarterback? I think that the Steelers will probably draft the quarterback somewhere in the middle rounds. If I had to take a guess on who I highlighted Michael Pratt from Tulane. He's a guy who has he's decent size, really accurate. Love the poise, the confidence. Really competitive dude. Plays with a chip on his shoulder. Really liked some of his process, especially over the middle of the field. Um, arm talent isn't like anything overwhelming, but I think he has like spot starter type vibes to him. If they could get him in the third or fourth round or something like that, I think that would be a decent move, especially with, Trubisky's probably going to be gone. Who knows about Rudolph, like what his contract situation ends up being in free agency. Like, does he have a chance to start here? I don't really know. Thomas, what do the Steelers need to add to their defense to be better? I think we've covered that one. And again, guys, I'm not trying to like ignore any questions or anything like that. I just know a lot of this stuff I don't want to be too repetitive. Chances they go anything other than tackle or cornerback in round one. Like I said, man, center. I would not discount them taking a center. I know we just very rarely see centers go in round one, so it kind of feels blasphemous to say that. But I just think what the Steelers need, the system, everything that, I just think that there's definitely a reason for that. Is there any valuable player for the Steelers at the quarterback spot in the draft? Same thing, just talked about. I don't see them going after like trading up. To me, in the first round, it's really a three-person race. Like I think May and Daniels are both fantastic prospects, deservedly top picks. Jaden Daniels is a guy that I can kind of get behind the upside of him as well as like a potential dual threat guy. Outside of that, like it's really a bunch of like day two guys for me. Like McCarthy, I watched him. I watched Penix. Um, I haven't watched Bo Nix yet. I've seen a ton of Bo Nix live just because he's played like, I don't know, he played like freaking however many 50 something games or whatever in college. So I've seen him a lot live. I need to study him though. So I don't want to give a firm take on that. I've watched Michael Pratt. I watched a little bit of Spencer Rattler this week. I think Rattler, there's another question I think somewhere in here about quarterbacks with upside. Rattler's an interesting player because, he got off to that super just torrid start at Oklahoma, and then he loses his job to Caleb Williams, and then transfers to South Carolina. I don't think like maybe he didn't have the first year that a lot of people wanted him to, so he goes back to school. He kind of just fell off the map this year, to be honest with you. And a lot of people were, maybe just not paying a lot of attention to South Carolina. I actually thought he had a pretty good year. Like some of the stuff that he did outside of the structure of the offense, because quite frankly, their offensive line was absolutely terrible, was actually encouraging. Like I thought he did take a step forward this year. Rattler has a very, very good arm. Like some of the elasticity, some of the arm angles that he can throw with. He's a natural creative thrower. Who has some aggressiveness to his game. I think there's like some maturity stuff that's obviously been well documented over the course of time. Some personality stuff that he'll have to answer in like interviews and stuff. But if you're talking about a guy that you could get like on the third round and maybe spin it towards, hey, this is the guy we'd like to develop. I think there's a lot of guys in this class that, even like, you could talk me into all the guys really that I just mentioned in terms of like, hey, would you like this guy on your team to develop? Yeah, I mean, I definitely wouldn't turn that down, especially when you're a team like the Steelers, who, in my opinion, doesn't have like a franchise quarterback on the roster. It's just, do you want to spend a first round pick on that level of talent? And I can't really justify really spending that type of capital with all the guys I kind of mentioned. And I'm not married to that take. I'm sure I'll watch more. I'll get to see these guys throw at the combine here in a couple weeks in person, and maybe I feel differently, or maybe it's more information. I'm open to being proven wrong. I don't see it just yet at the January 30th point. Always thoughts on the running back class. Always hard to grade running backs. This year feels especially harder. Not a great running back class. I will tell you a guy that I really like though, Isaac Guerendo for Louisville. My buddy Nick Martin's been on this train too. Guerendo played at my alma mater, Louisville. Very, very good player. Like NFL size, prototype. He is going to be. he's going to go day 3 probably, and he's going to be a 1B type of runner, and people are going to be wondering like how they let this guy who could easily have 800 plus rushing yards go in on day 3. Really like Grindo, can really move for his size too. Do you think D line's in play first 2 rounds? Like I said, I think that in type of investment would be a little rich for me personally, just based on what they've already got up front. Um, and maybe that's fallen into a little bit of the uh, sunken cost fallacy with Ogunjobi's contract, but I just don't see that happening. How much influence will the OC have on the draft and free agency? Goes back to what I said. Better get a center, man. Because right now, like there is some stuff with Smith's scheme, and I'm sure like we'll go over some of this stuff on the channel. That there's some stuff that he absolutely needs that is just not on the roster right now, and it's okay. It's January 30th. There's plenty of time to get that, but there's a lot there. What round should the Steelers draft quarterback competition? I already answered that one. KP be successful at highly schemed offense like San Francisco or Miami. That one. Okay, Jonathan, this is a good question. What is the Steelers moving around their offensive line from their unnatural positions, and are you surprised Tomlin isn't asked about it more? So, I do think that there is some validity to this question. I think what he's referring to is, Kevin Dotson, played out of position, quote unquote, with the Steelers, and then went to the Rams, had a career year. He's about to get paid a huge bag in free agency. Awesome for Dotson. I think more than anything, man, Dotson just wasn't consistent when he was here. The flashes and the highs were always there. It was just the penalties and the lows that were just mind-boggling to me. But hey, I'm glad he figured it out. That scheme over there fit him a lot better. That gap-heavy scheme. The Steelers got more gap-heavy as the season went along, but last year and stuff, Dotson just wasn't really a fit here. I think even from a positional standpoint, setting that stuff aside. But I mean, here's the deal. Like, I think a lot of people are going to make a lot of it, and I do agree that I mean, you'd prefer them to play everybody to play at their position that they're most comfortable in. But having said that, I don't think it's as like cut and dry as like people are making it seem like either. Like for example, a lot of people are saying like about Broderick Jones, like being upset that he was on the right side. I kind of get why they did it, making that switch in the like mid-season, even if it necessarily wasn't ideal, which I agree with. And some of his struggles could definitely be related back to that aspect of it, right? Like he just wasn't comfortable playing on the right side. It's you listen to former offensive linemen talk about that. It's like playing with your left hand, like shooting with your left hand in basketball. Like if you're right-handed, like it's difficult. You're doing everything backwards. Now, having said that, like some of the stuff that you saw on tape with Jones and pass protection this year, that same stuff was on tape at Georgia. You can go back and watch my draft video that I did the night that they took him. A lot of the same stuff he was dealing with then, he's dealing with now. So I mean, it's really not that surprising. And then like you can always say like, oh, like he wouldn't be having those problems if he was on the left side. Well, you got to understand too, like there is downside with that too. Like when you're on when the tackle is struggling in pass protection on the right side, it's not just that side is typically the side you like to run the ball to, but it's more about that side is typically in the quarterback's vision because most quarterbacks are right-handed. So like if that guy gets beat really quick in 1.2 seconds and needs to make a play outside of the structure of the offense or going into creation mode, it's a lot easier because that guy's in your vision. Well, when he's on the left side, a little bit more difficult, right? Because it's your blind side. You don't really like guys aren't anticipating pressure in that quick amount of time. And some of Broderick's losses have been really quick. So all in all, I think, they need to make a decision one way or another. Like one thing that I definitely do not think they can do is just keep flip-flopping him back and forth. Either he's a right tackle next year and moving forward, or he's a left tackle. Like let him grow and develop, make sure that you have the requisite tools in the building to help him get to a ceiling. So just pick one or the other. I don't like the constant moving back and forth. This is a good question. If we had Arthur Smith as offensive coordinator, do you see any more coaches come in, like an actual quarterback coach, Munchak back? I mean, it's weird. Like we haven't really got like a ton of clarification on like which coaches are going to be back or not. It sounds like Mike Sullivan's probably not back. Like who else? What other positions are available? Like, are they going to potentially add a guy like Thomas Brown, who they interviewed? Maybe bring him in as a running backs coach. Could Munchak, Arthur Smith has a relationship with Munchak dating back to Tennessee. I'm sure that he's probably somewhat of a mentor for Smith, just based on their time together. I don't really know as much about that relationship. I've been meaning to read up on it. I will now that he's been hired. But I do think that is important. Now, an actual quarterback coach, I would like to see them add a quarterback coach / pass game coordinator. If you go back to the video yesterday, as a reminder, there definitely is some drawbacks, I think, to Smith's offense, specifically in the drop back passing game. So I would like to see them add another mind to, you know, kind of enhance that aspect of the offense, because I think it's definitely something you need for sure. Jordan Travis interests you in the mid rounds. I haven't studied Travis. People that I really trust are lukewarm on Travis, but I've seen some people saying that Travis might be good in a West Coast system. So maybe I could see that. I'll have to get to your question though when I fully study him. I've seen mostly day 3 stuff on Travis though, just from like Draft Nicks. Of any centers in the draft, Steelers Wade, I know he's a heavy commenter on the channel, so definitely want to get to this one. Any of them known for extra high center football IQ? Yeah, I mean, Zach Frazier and Jack Spires Johnson, like both those guys, I think are really intelligent football players. Like you see it when they play, the way that they navigate like blitz pickups, making calls, stuff like that. I want to watch a little bit more of Frazier to say like one way or another of who I'd prefer in that situation. But like I said, JPJ, man, like I've seen enough to where I'm not going to be upset if they take him at 20. Like I don't think it's like I just don't think it's being talked about enough as like a legitimate possibility. Joe Milton. Joe Milton to me is a tight end. I know the arm's like incredibly crazy. I know he's got a rocket launcher, bazooka. I just don't think that there's been enough like. For one, the offense that he plays in is one of the least translatable offenses that I've ever seen in terms of comparing college to the NFL. And I just don't see enough progression with him as a pure passer beyond just like being a freakish bazooka armed quarterback. Just not really my type of quarterback, to be honest with you. What do you think the day 3 strategy is for the Steelers? Take best. So this is a good question about Zach, and this is something that I think is really important. Day 3 is more about best player available. You're really going off like your board. Most NFL teams, for a lot of you guys probably know this, but most NFL teams, their boards are only about like 100, 125 players. Like it's not the 500-600 players that are draft eligible. Like it's 100, 125 players. Once you get into day 3, you may only have like 35, 40 guys that you had draftable grades on. And from there, you're just taking the best player available. Like need doesn't matter as much. You're just trying to get like the best football players, because those guys are going to be the guys that, are competing for roster spots. They're probably going to have to play special teams. You're looking for probably a lot of like intangible stuff for upside, specific skill niche types. Can you get a day 3 like box safety, who's also like a good special teamer, or can you get a day 3 wide receiver who's excellent at running down punts or has kick return values, stuff like that. That's what you're looking for. Guys that can do more than one thing. Positional versatility, I always think matters for prospects more than we talk about, but especially for guys on day 3. Good question here. Who's your favorite player who'd be available on day 3? Man, that's a good question. Trying to think here. I don't know. I'll have to come back to that because I'm gonna say somebody and then I'm gonna regret who I say. Mid-round quarterback, do you like? Where I talked about that. 2 underrated receivers, Nice Smith, Tavion Robinson. What are their draft stocks like? To me, Smith looks like and runs like Debo. Smith is an interesting player. He's got some route running nuance to his game. Been pretty highly productive in college. He's just really small, man. So that's the tough one. There's a lot of those type of guys, especially like the Shrine Bowl. Like I know Taj Washington from USC, Malik Washington. He's more dense in his lower half, which I like. But there's a lot of those type of like super specific slot receivers. Like last year's draft class was super specific slot receivers. This year, the top guys aren't as small. But I do think as far as Robinson, I haven't studied him, so I can't really say like one way or another in terms of what his draft stock would be. I've seen some fans on Twitter though. My dream quarterback, offensive tackle, center in the first 2 rounds, no reaching, assuming there's one available with each pick, could be considered best player available. Well, who could those 3 guys be? Which round? Oh man, that's a tough one. Because I'm trying to still like hammer out like where specifically some of the bigger, more connected names have these guys. I already kind of talked about Terry and Arnold. Another like if you're talking about like maybe you go off to tackle center, maybe you get Powers Johnson, maybe you got like Mims Fuaga in the first round, and then you go back and you are able to get maybe a center like Powers Johnson or Frazier. Guy that I really like, cornerback in the third, Cam Hart from Notre Dame. He was a guy who I loved coming into the season. Not this past year, the year before. Tape was really inconsistent, had kind of an up and down year. Benjamin Morrison, like his running mate, seemed to start getting more hype. Um, but Cam Hart has all the physical tools in the world. Former receiver background before he got to Notre Dame. I want to say he might have even been a receiver recruit. Uh, but there are some really, really nice moments from him in terms of click and close ability. He has potential press ability as well. Fluid for his size, can really run. So he's a guy that I really like in terms of if you're looking for a 3-round scenario, maybe that's something you'd be interested in. Already kind of talked about the quarterback, Sean. I know Sean is a supporter of the channel. Unless Art's blowing the smoke screen, how could they possibly run it back with Mason Kinney again? Look, man, I've already hit on this a bunch on Twitter, for better or worse. And I think some people are probably tired of hearing me talk about it. But if they just run it back with Pickett and Rudolph at quarterback next season, like they don't add like a veteran, they don't like it's not what I would do. And I think that it severely limits their ceiling. And maybe they get into the offseason and maybe the brass just feels like, hey, like, well, there just aren't enough potential upgrades. Like we don't see, all these different avenues as like significant upgrades over what we've got. We're going to give it another year and then we'll try to hammer this thing out in, 2025 or whatever and see what Pickett or Rudolph does with the new offensive coordinator. It's just not what I would do. I just think with the defense being older, and you got Cam Hayward kind of on his last little run here. TJ Watt's going to be 30. You got Minka Fitzpatrick and Alex Highsmith both in their primes, but on second, really expensive contracts. To me, I just want to push the chips in. You're going on 7-8 years now without a playoff win. I just think it's time to be, really aggressive. And you guys can go to my tweet on Twitter, my pinned tweet. I watched, or I wrote about that, about like how the Steelers really need to be aggressive this offseason about acquiring an offensive coordinator and quarterback upgrade in order to, get out of this kind of middle ground purgatory that they're in. Would you want to risk the compensation to trade up for Jaden Daniels? Kind of talked a little bit about that earlier. I think that Daniels does have significant upside. I think that he's going to get pushed up probably in the top 10, maybe even top 5. So that's a pretty significant haul. You better be really, really confident that dude's going to pan out. I'm not quite there with him at that point in the draft. Personally, just in terms of what I've seen. But do you think there's realistic, optimistic opportunities for the Steelers to trade up? Yes, absolutely, I do. One thing that's noteworthy as we get 52 minutes into this video, good Lord. All right, I'm going to try to wrap this up in 7 minutes. Jim Nagy, Senior Bowl Director, talked about how just the COVID stuff and NIL, there's a lot of guys that would normally go on day 3 that went back to school. Like there was a record low number of underclassmen that had declared for the draft this year. So what that's done is it's depleted a lot of the candidates that you typically see on day 3. So I think you're going to see teams be really aggressive in terms of trying to trade up because maybe those picks, I've even seen the idea floated around that like maybe like teams could give up day 3 picks this year for day 3 picks next year, like in terms of just like pushing the envelope backwards or whatever. But so that is something to keep an eye on. We could see multiple teams, not just the Steelers, do that. But I do think trading up, Omar Khan showed the willingness to do it in his first ever draft. I have no reason to think that, he wouldn't do that again. First choice and tackle and center, Jackson Powers Johnson and Fashanu are my top players at both of those positions. Charlie talked a lot about Powers Johnson. They don't have a shot in hell of getting Fashanu from Penn State, but I think he's the best player. Reportedly showing interest in Jordan Travis. I wonder where, I'm going to ask Chuck off stream where he's getting that information because I'm interested to hear it. Travis is at the Shrine Bowl, but they meet with everybody. I'm just curious on where that information is coming from. Travis to me on day 2 would be a little rich, just personally. But again, I haven't studied him, so I need to watch that, I guess. Am I crazy to think they may go wide receiver if the right guy fell to them? I don't think wide receivers on the table in round one, provided that Deontay and George are both in the fold next year. It's also worth noting that Arthur Smith just doesn't run a lot of 11 personnel, so like wide receiver need is probably like pushed down, I would say, um, just because he doesn't really utilize those personnel groupings. So I will say this: a lot of guys, especially you guys, deserve it if you made it this far through the video. One of the guys that I really, really like is Florida's Ricky Purcell. Like, dude, that dude is a baller. It's a loaded receiver class, man. He's not getting nearly enough hype. He's a guy that's probably going to go in the middle rounds, sometime in the 3 to 5 range, I would guess. But man, I would love to have him on the Steelers. Inside outside versatility, excellent hands, body control, really manipulative route runner. Love the nuance, the tempo that he uses, eats up cushion. Pretty snappy in and out of his breaks. He's not a super athlete, and I don't think he's like a wide receiver one type of ceiling. But this dude's going to be a really heavy contributor for a long time. If you were to ask me like which wide receiver could come in like in the middle rounds and outplay his draft stock right away, it would be Purcell. Older prospect, so he's 24, so you kind of expect that a little bit. But he's a guy that I like. Wrote about him earlier for Steelers now. Already talked about Frazier, Fuaga. Of all the options for the quarterback room, which you think is the best outcome? I know y'all are probably tired of hearing it, man, especially on Twitter. But I really think like if Kirk Cousins is even if you got to pay 30, 40 million, I would have no problem doing that in order to maximize this 2-year window with the guys that they've got. I know it's aggressive. I don't really care what that does to the cap situation 4 or 3 years from now, just because like by that time, Cam Hayward's retired. TJ Watt is, 33 and well out of his prime. Alex Highsmith, Minka approaching 30. Like I really want to push the chips in right here just to see if they can maximize that. And I think Cousins is a good enough quarterback to where, if you have a top 10 defense that plays like it in the playoffs and, you surround him in the right system. And I think Cousins would do well in our system as well. So, da, 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 da. Man, you guys, do you like Sanders still as our next Mike Hilton? We talked about that earlier. Joseph, we talked about Sweat. Y'all are dialed into the centers, man. I respect it. I love the offensive line talk. Already talked about this. Sports 412. Yes, the inside linebacker class is really weak. No on JJ McCarthy being round one for me right now, personally. Cornerback or offensive tackle, both are great positions. Like I said, it just depends on what the board looks like. Quarterbacks with the highest upside. I mean, Caleb Williams. I think Caleb Williams could be fantastic. Absolutely. I've been a big Caleb fan since the very first time I watched him play at Oklahoma in his very first game. I could not believe it. I was watching. Unbelievable talent. Penix Jr. at 20. I'm out on that personally. That's just me though. I just don't see some of the stuff with Penix that really bothers me in terms of things that concern me. There's just that offense, all the vertical stuff. Like he is a good vertical thrower, and like I love the aggressiveness and some of the throws that he can make. Like that arm, he basically throws with all arm, like gets nothing from his lower body. Just kind of a weird, being a lefty. Like it looks crazy, and like the way that he can whip the ball with the velocity and touch is nice. There's just very little stuff that he does in the middle of the field. Like I just don't think that he sees or throws well with anticipation over the middle, and I just think it's really hard to live at the next level. It's really hard to live in that world where like so much of your success comes off those like go balls and deep shots and stuff like that. Just because the way that the NFL plays defense right now, it's designed to kind of take that stuff away. I'm just not sure there's enough substance with Penix's game right now, especially once you consider, also he's an older prospect with a lengthy amount of his injury history. So I think Penix could potentially be a starter in the league. It's just he's not somebody that I would be comfortable betting on in round one. Could see Steelers moving up for in round one. Like I said, man, I love Terry Arnold. I would have no problem moving up for him. So I'll probably hammer that home on Twitter. Already answered this. Mims are a corner. We already talked about middle linebackers. Do you think the Steelers are playing it slow for the offensive coordinator hire? They're not, because they just hired Arthur Smith. So some of those questions just untimely in terms of stuff I've already gotten to. But we got it done in an hour. I cannot believe I did that straight. For first and foremost, thank you guys so much for watching. If you made it all the way through the video, much appreciated. Let me know in the comments if like you guys like this kind of stuff. Is this helpful for you all? Of course, Twitter is the best way to interact with me because I try to interact and answer as many questions as possible. Also, we'll try to get to DMs if I can. Um, but if you guys don't follow me over there, like y'all can get in on some of this. Like I'll talk about this stuff all the time, nonstop on Twitter, way more than I should. I'm trying to reduce the amount of scrolling I'm doing on there. But if you guys like this type of stuff, let me know. I'm also planning on doing this for YouTube. Like I would love to set up a time like where I could get it out a couple days in advance and a time that works for a lot of the subscribers to kind of come in and be able to like answer questions live, kind of like this. It's difficult because my work schedule and stuff, just trying to get a live stream going is just with my schedule right now. It's kind of tough, guys, and I apologize. But y'all can drop me comments in the comment section of this video, and I'll try to answer as many as I can as well. If you guys have other like prospects that y'all want to see film rooms on, let me know. I'm thinking about maybe doing an offensive lineman this week in terms of a film room, maybe Jackson Powers Johnson or maybe somebody else. I'm not really sure on how I'm going to do it just yet, but I'd like to get one more of those done this week. But if you guys have people that y'all want to see, let me know. Like, subscribe, make sure y'all turn on notification bells, holler at me. I really appreciate everybody's support and love on the channel. Y'all have a good rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of your week. Peace.